Rizwan lived on the edge of Maplewood, a quiet neighborhood filled with neat lawns and shiny mailboxes. His property was small but perfect. A modest garden, a few fruit trees, and a sturdy little house that looked welcoming. The best part was that his land was not part of the HOA, the homeowners association that ran most of Maplewood. For Rizwan, this meant freedom. He could paint his house any color, plant wildflowers in the yard, and even keep his old wooden fence without anyone complaining. For months, Rizwan enjoyed his peaceful mornings. Birds would sing, the sun would rise over the distant hills, and he could sip his tea on the porch without disturbance. That calm, however, was about to change. One Tuesday morning, Rizwan noticed something strange. A large, shiny SUV was parked near the entrance of the neighborhood. Its windows were dark, and the engine hummed quietly. He frowned. Usually visitors came and went politely. He stepped closer to see. From a distance, he could make out a woman in a bright blazer speaking on the phone, waving her hands as if giving orders. Something about her looked familiar, and the more he watched, the more he realized why. This was the HOA president, Mrs. Karen Whitaker. She was well known in Maplewood for her strict rules and endless inspections. She had a sharp voice and even sharper opinions. Many neighbors tried to avoid her, but she always seemed to find reasons to make complaints. Rizwan had never been part of the HOA, and until now that had kept him safe from her notices and warnings. The SUV moved slowly down the street, and Rizwan could see more vehicles following. A large bus came into view, then another, and another. 10 buses. His jaw dropped. What is she doing? Rizwan muttered to himself. 10 buses here? From the first bus, people began to pour out. They looked confused, carrying bags and cameras. Some whispered to each other, glancing at the houses. Rizwan realized immediately these were strangers sent to his property. The HOA must have organized some kind of forced tour or inspection, but Rizwan had never agreed to it. Karen stepped out of her SUV, clapping her hands. "All right, everyone, welcome to the Maplewood demonstration tour," she said, her voice loud and commanding. "Today we will visit one property outside our HOA rules. This is a special case. Observe carefully." Rizwan felt his blood pressure rise. Observe carefully? His home was his sanctuary. He did not want anyone prying into his garden, his house, or his personal life. He ran to the gate at the entrance of his property. It was old but strong, made of metal bars and a secure lock. Rizwan had a plan. He reached the latch just as the first group of strangers stepped onto his lawn. "I'm sorry, but you are not welcome here," Rizwan said, raising his voice. Karen turned around, her eyebrows shooting up. "This is public property," Karen shouted. "You can't lock the gate." Rizwan shook his head. "This is my private land. You do not have permission. Please leave." Before Karen could react further, Rizwan turned the lock. The metal clicked into place, shutting the gate completely. The sound echoed like a firm warning. People inside the property froze. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was part of a joke. Others started looking for another way out. Karen's face went red with anger. Rizwan opened this gate immediately. "You have no right." "I do have a right," Rizwan replied calmly but firmly. "This is my property. You were never invited. Please respect my space." The strangers on the lawn started murmuring. Many looked uneasy, realizing they had no way to leave. The buses were outside, but the distance to the main road was longer than they expected. Some children started tugging at their parents, asking why they could not leave. Karen stomped toward the gate, trying to reach the lock, but Rizwan stood his ground. "The gate is secure," he said. "I will not let anyone trespass. You can leave on your own, but you cannot stay here without permission." The tourists hesitated, unsure what to do. Karen turned back toward the buses, dialing something on her phone. Rizwan stayed near the gate, keeping watch. From a distance, he could see neighbors peeking from their windows. Rumors spread quickly in Maplewood, and soon a small crowd had gathered along the street, curious about the commotion. Rizwan's mind raced. He had to keep the situation under control. He walked slowly along the gate, his eyes scanning the area. He noticed a few of the strangers were snapping pictures, probably intending to report him. That gave him an idea. "If you want photos," Rizwan called out, "you may take them from outside the gate. Inside is private property, and you will be trespassing if you enter." The strangers murmured, some nodding reluctantly. They did not want trouble, and Rizwan knew that fear of being on the wrong side of the law could work in his favor. Karen huffed, pacing in front of the gate. This is unbelievable. You can't just trap people like this. I will call the police, Rizwan smiled slightly. If you call the police, they will see that this is private property. They will see that you and your guests are trespassing. I am only protecting my home. You are free to leave any time. The gate will not stop you from going back to your buses. Karen raised her hands in frustration. This is outrageous. Everyone will hear about this. By now, more neighbors had stepped outside. Some whispered words of support to Rizwan. A few even brought lawn chairs to watch what would happen next. It seemed like the entire street had become a stage. Rizwan took a deep breath. He knew he had to be patient. He could not let anger take over. He went back to his porch and picked up his cup of tea. Calmly, he sipped it, looking at the strangers pacing on his lawn. He imagined how the story would travel through Maplewood, the HOA president sending 10 buses of strangers to a non-HOA property, and the owner locking the gate behind them. It was ironic, but it also sent a clear message. Rizwan respected his home and he respected boundaries. Some of the strangers began to talk among themselves. Maybe we shouldn't be here, one said. Another whispered, I think we are trespassing. Slowly, the mood shifted. They were no longer curious tourists. They were visitors trapped in a space they did not belong. Karen, realizing her plan was failing, began shouting again. Rizwan, open this gate at once. This is harassment. Rizwan shook his head. This is protection. You are the ones trespassing. You chose to come here without permission. The law is on my side. I am only asking you to respect private property. By mid-morning, the strangers were growing restless. Some children sat on the grass, some adults tried to step over the gate but found it impossible. Rizwan stayed calm, occasionally checking the lock to make sure it was secure. The sun climbed higher and the situation became more uncomfortable for Karen and her group than for Rizwan. Neighbors began waving from their yards, some even bringing snacks and water for Rizwan. It was a small show of support, but it reminded him that he was not alone. Maplewood may have many rules, but not everyone followed Karen's ideas blindly. Hours passed. Karen finally realized that nothing she could say would convince Rizwan to open the gate. Her face was pale with frustration, and she muttered under her breath about lawsuits and complaints. Meanwhile, Rizwan watched from his porch, sipping his tea. He knew that this was only the beginning. The day had started peacefully, but now Maplewood would remember it for a long time. 10 buses of strangers sent to one small non-HOA property, and one determined owner standing firm at the gate. Rizwan smiled quietly. His property, his rules, and that was exactly how he intended to keep it. The sun had climbed high, casting bright light over Rizwan's property. The strangers who had arrived on the 10 buses were now scattered across the yard, some sitting on the grass, others pacing back and forth. Karen Whitaker was standing near the gate, her hands on her hips, clearly frustrated. Rizwan remained calm on his porch, sipping tea as if nothing unusual was happening. Rizwan, Karen called again, her voice sharper this time. This is your final warning. Open the gate now or face consequences. Rizwan smiled politely. The gate is locked. You and your guests are on private property without permission. You can leave any time by returning to your buses. Karen's frustration grew, but she noticed something. The visitors were starting to question the situation. A woman holding a camera said quietly, Maybe we shouldn't have come here. This seems wrong. Another man nodded. He is calm and the gate is locked. We are clearly trespassing. Karen turned on her heels, muttering to herself. She didn't expect the crowd to lose confidence. She tried a different tactic. Everyone, this man is breaking neighborhood rules. We are here to educate him. Stand with me. A few people shifted awkwardly. Most looked uncomfortable. Rizwan watched quietly, knowing the key was patience. He walked down from the porch and stood a few steps from the gate. His presence was calm but firm. Listen, Rizwan said, addressing the group. I do not want conflict. I respect peace and I respect rules. But my property is private. You were not invited. You are free to leave. No one is being stopped from leaving except by your own confusion. A murmur spread through the group. Karen tried to regain control. Rizwan, you cannot speak to my visitors like this. They are here for a reason. Rizwan nodded. I understand that. But the reason does not allow trespassing. You are all on private property and I am only protecting my home. One of the younger visitors, a boy about 12, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, can we go?" "I don't like this," he whispered. She sighed, looking at the others. Some visitors had already started moving toward the gate. Realizing Rizwan was right, Karen noticed the movement and shouted, "Do not leave. You cannot just leave like this. Follow the instructions." Rizwan's lips curved into a small smile. He took a step closer to the gate. "You are free to leave. I am not forcing anyone to stay. This is not a trick or a trap. The gate is just here to make the boundary clear," several visitors whispered to each other. The confusion and unease had begun to shift the balance. Karen was losing her audience, and Rizwan's calm demeanor was winning their trust. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had become curious. People peered from windows, some even standing along their driveways. A few neighbors walked down, asking Rizwan if he was okay. Rizwan waved them back, knowing he had the situation under control. Karen, realizing that her plan was failing, tried another strategy. She pulled out her phone and began recording the scene, speaking into it as if narrating a story. "This man has trapped my guests. He is refusing to follow rules. This is outrageous." Rizwan did not respond. He knew arguing with a phone camera would only make him look smaller, so he stayed calm and patient. He could feel the tension among the visitors growing. Some were beginning to whisper about leaving immediately. By mid-afternoon, several people had already returned to their buses. Karen was left with only a small group, still confused and unsure. She could see that the longer they stayed, the more the visitors would question her authority. Rizwan took another step toward the gate. "If you want to continue this visit, you are welcome to watch from outside the property. Inside, however, is private, and I will not allow anyone to stay without permission." One of the visitors, a young woman, raised her hand hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir. You are saying we can leave any time? We don't have to stay." Rizwan nodded. "That is correct. No one is forcing you. You can go back to your buses. I do not want conflict. I want peace." Karen tried to shout again, but the effect was fading. The visitors were listening to Rizwan now, not her. They realized he was calm, reasonable, and in control. The younger boy tugged his mother's hand again. "Mom, let's go." "He is right. This is his home." She nodded, and slowly they walked toward the gate. Other visitors followed, returning to the buses. Karen's group had dwindled significantly. Rizwan observed silently, keeping an eye on the remaining few. He knew Karen was not giving up easily. Her pride and position in the HOA would not allow her to leave quietly. Karen's face turned red as she realized her failure. "This is unacceptable," she said, pacing near the gate. "You will regret this. I will report you. The HOA will take action." Rizwan took a deep breath. "You are free to report anything you wish. I have done nothing wrong. This is private property. The law will be on my side. I am only protecting my home." The remaining visitors hesitated. They could see the determination in Rizwan's eyes. Karen's loud words seemed smaller compared to his calm strength. Slowly, they began walking back toward the buses. Karen's frustration grew. She tried to shout one last time, but it felt empty. Rizwan had already won the trust of her audience. Her words no longer carried the same authority. Rizwan returned to his porch, sitting down with his tea. He looked around at the emptying lawn and felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. His home was safe and his boundary had been respected. Neighbors came closer, curious about the situation. One of them, Mr. Hassan from next door, smiled and said, "You handled that well, Rizwan. Calm and firm. That is the best way." Rizwan nodded. "I only wanted peace. I didn't want trouble. But my property is private. That is the most important thing." As the buses drove away, Karen remained behind, fuming. Rizwan watched her retreat to her car, shaking his head. He knew she would not forget this day, and that her pride had been challenged. The sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the yard. Rizwan walked among his fruit trees and flowers, checking that everything was in order. His garden was peaceful, his house undisturbed, and for the first time in hours he felt complete calm. He knew this was only the start of a larger story. Karen might try other ways to assert control or return with new plans. But Rizwan was ready. He had already proven that calm intelligence and clear boundaries could win against aggression and unnecessary rules. Neighbors waved and returned to their homes, some whispering about what had happened. Word would spread quickly across Maplewood about the day 10 buses of strangers arrived at a non-HOA property, and the owner locked the gate behind them. Rizwan smiled quietly. It was ironic, but it was also a lesson in respect and patience. As evening approached, Rizwan walked back to his porch. The air was cool and pleasant. He sat down and took a deep breath, enjoying the quiet of his property. The world outside could have all its chaos, but here, in his own home, he was at peace. For Rizwan, the day had been long but victorious. He had faced authority, strangers, and tension without anger, without fear, and without compromise on what was rightfully his. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light on the lawn, Rizwan knew one thing clearly. His home was his sanctuary, and he would always protect it, no matter the challenge. The next morning, Rizwan woke to the sound of birds chirping and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of his trees. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful again. The previous day's events were fresh in his mind, but the calm of the morning gave him a sense of relief. He walked to the gate and checked it. The lock was secure, the metal strong, and nothing seemed disturbed. However, Rizwan knew better than to assume the matter was over. Karen Whitaker would not forget her failure so easily. The pride of the HOA president was hurt, and hurt pride often led to more elaborate plans. Rizwan thought carefully about what could happen next. He had to remain vigilant. By mid-morning, his suspicions proved correct. Across the street, he noticed a familiar SUV pulling up. Karen had returned, but this time she looked different. She was accompanied by a small group, each person holding clipboards and cameras. Rizwan realized immediately that she had come with reinforcements, hoping that numbers would intimidate him. Karen stepped out and waved at him. "Good morning, Rizwan. I hope you slept well," she said, her voice polite but sharp. "I have some people with me today. They are here to explain why your property needs to comply with neighborhood rules." Rizwan took a slow sip of his tea, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Good morning, Karen. I see you brought guests. Please remember that my property is private. Anyone who steps inside without permission is trespassing." Karen frowned as if she had not expected such a measured response. "We are not here to trespass. We are here to educate you." Rizwan nodded politely. "I appreciate education, but I only accept it in a respectful way. That means outside the gate." The group hesitated. Some whispered among themselves. It was clear they had heard the story from yesterday and were wary of repeating the same mistake. Rizwan noticed their hesitation and knew he had the advantage. Calm confidence often influenced people more than loud commands. Karen tried a different approach. "Rizwan, we have documents here that show you must follow certain guidelines. You cannot refuse forever." Rizwan tilted his head. "Documents do not allow entry. They do not give permission to step onto private property. You are free to show me any papers from outside the gate." Karen's expression hardened. "This is ridiculous. We need to enter your property to measure and inspect." Rizwan walked to the gate and gestured to the lock. "I will not allow it. I am willing to discuss matters, but inside the property is not negotiable. Outside is acceptable." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Some muttered about following orders, others about not wanting trouble. Rizwan noticed a young man in a gray sweater looking especially uncertain. He seemed ready to walk away, but fear of Karen's authority held him back. Rizwan spoke to the young man calmly. "You do not have to be part of this if you do not want to. Respect for private property is more important than following orders blindly." The young man nodded subtly, relieved. Karen noticed and frowned. She realized her plan was not working again. Rizwan's calm and measured responses were stronger than her arguments and commands. As the hours passed, Karen attempted different tactics. She tried to argue rules. She tried to pressure Rizwan with claims of fines, and she tried to intimidate the visitors. Each time Rizwan responded calmly, clearly explaining his rights. Neighbors began to notice again. A few children waved from their yards. Some adults came outside to watch. Rumors were already spreading about Karen's return and her new attempt to enter the property. This attention made the group even more hesitant. They realized that they were not only trespassing, but also being observed by an entire neighborhood. By afternoon, Karen's visitors had grown restless. They whispered among themselves, questioning why they were there and whether they should even stay. Rizwan remained on the porch, observing everything. He understood that patience and quiet strength were more effective than anger. Rizwan decided to take the initiative. He walked slowly to the gate and spoke, addressing both Karen and her group. "I am happy to answer questions. I am happy to provide information. But it must be outside the property. That is fair and respectful." A few visitors began nodding, realizing that Rizwan's offer was reasonable. Karen, however, was not used to reason winning over obedience. She tried one last time. "Rizwan, you cannot control everything. The HOA has authority and we will act if necessary." Rizwan smiled. "Authority does not mean permission. My property is private. Authority outside the law cannot override the rights of a property owner. You are free to leave any time, or you can speak with me respectfully from the gate." By late afternoon, most visitors had returned to the SUVs. Karen's small group had dwindled again, and she realized that her plan was failing. Rizwan's calm, firm approach had won over everyone except her. She fumed silently, watching her strategy crumble. Rizwan took the opportunity to speak directly to the remaining few. "You do not have to stay here. You do not have to follow anyone blindly. Respect for property and respect for people is more important than showing authority." The remaining visitors finally nodded and returned to their vehicles. Karen's small group stayed, but she seemed frustrated and unsure. Rizwan's calm strength had not only protected his property, but had also shown others the importance of patience, reasoning, and standing firm. As the evening approached, Rizwan walked through his garden, checking his flowers and fruit trees. He smiled quietly. The day had been long, but he had proven that respect and calm intelligence were stronger than force and loud arguments. From a distance, he noticed Karen leaving in her SUV, muttering to herself. He knew she would not forget this day, and he knew she might plan new ways to challenge him. But Rizwan was ready. He had already shown that strength could come from patience, clarity, and respect for what is right. Neighbors waved to him as they returned to their homes. Some whispered words of encouragement. Others simply smiled, knowing that one determined person could stand firm against unnecessary rules. Rizwan nodded politely, appreciating their support but remaining focused on his own home. By nightfall, the sky was painted with shades of orange and purple. Rizwan sat on his porch looking at the stars. The wind rustled the leaves gently and the garden smelled sweet. For the first time in hours, he felt a deep sense of peace. His property was safe, his boundaries were respected, and he had handled the challenge without anger or conflict. He knew, however, that the story was not over. Karen's pride was wounded and her determination could lead to new strategies. Rizwan would need to stay vigilant, clever, and calm. But for now, he enjoyed the victory of reason and patience. As Rizwan prepared for bed, he reflected on the lessons of the day. Strength does not always come from force. Sometimes it comes from calmness, intelligence, and the courage to stand firm. By protecting what was rightfully his, he had also shown others the power of respect and clear boundaries. And in Maplewood, the story of the non-HOA property that had resisted 10 buses of strangers was beginning to spread. People would remember Rizwan not just as someone who locked a gate, but as someone who had defended his home with dignity and intelligence. Rizwan closed his eyes that night with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The challenges of tomorrow would come, but he was ready. He had learned how to handle aggression with calm, how to face numbers with patience, and how to turn an unfair situation into a lesson in respect. The night passed peacefully. Rizwan's property remained secure, his garden untouched and his home quiet. But the days ahead promised new tests. Karen would not give up easily, and Rizwan knew that intelligence, calmness, and courage would be his best allies, and so Rizwan rested, knowing that the battle for respect and peace was ongoing, but also confident that he could face it with wisdom, patience, and unwavering resolve. The morning sun rose over Maplewood, casting a golden glow on Rizwan's property. His garden shimmered with dew, and the fruit trees glowed in the soft light. Rizwan moved slowly among the plants, checking for any signs of damage or disturbance from the previous days. So far, everything was perfect. The gate remained locked, the fence strong, and his home untouched. Rizwan knew that Karen Whitaker would not give up easily. She had tried intimidation, rules, and persuasion, but he had remained calm and firm. Yet he sensed that her next attempt would be different. Karen's pride had been hurt, and she was known for her persistence. Around mid-morning, a distant sound caught his attention. The familiar hum of vehicles grew louder. Rizwan looked up to see a small convoy approaching his property. It was not as large as the 10 buses from before, but it carried several people with clipboards, measuring tools, and cameras. Karen was at the front, wearing her sharp blazer and determined expression. Rizwan stepped to the gate and called out, "Good morning, Karen. I see you brought a smaller group today. I assume you have a new plan." Karen frowned but did not respond immediately. She waved her group forward. "We are here to ensure that you understand the community guidelines. This is your final chance to comply voluntarily." Rizwan shook his head calmly. "My property is private. You are welcome to observe from outside the gate. Inside is not negotiable." Karen's group hesitated, unsure how to proceed. She looked at Rizwan, her expression a mix of frustration and disbelief.
"You are making this unnecessarily difficult."
"We are only here to help." Rizwan took a step closer to the gate. "I respect help when it is offered politely and outside private property. Inside is not acceptable without permission." One of Karen's assistants, a man with glasses and a clipboard, whispered nervously, "Maybe we should just leave. Yesterday was confusing enough." Karen shot him a sharp glance. "Do not talk like that. Follow my instructions." Rizwan noticed the unease spreading through the group. Calmly, he addressed them. "You are free to leave if you wish. You do not have to participate in this demonstration. You have the right to respect private property, and I encourage you to exercise it." A few people shifted nervously. Some muttered about following orders, others about avoiding conflict. Rizwan realized that patience was working in his favor. His calm voice and measured actions made people think, and they were beginning to question Karen's authority. Karen, seeing her influence weakening, decided to try a new strategy. "Rizwan, we have planned this visit carefully. You must comply. Otherwise, we will escalate the situation." Rizwan smiled faintly. "Escalation does not change my rights. This is private property, and trespassing is not allowed. You may choose to leave or remain outside the gate. Both options are acceptable." Karen's face reddened. She waved her hands, attempting to appear commanding. "This is unacceptable."
"We have rules and you cannot ignore them."
Rizwan stayed calm. "Rules do not grant permission to enter someone's home. Respect for boundaries is a rule that applies everywhere. I am only asking for it to be respected here." As the morning passed, Karen tried to pressure Rizwan further. She mentioned fines, inspections, and even potential legal action. Rizwan listened politely, nodding but never raising his voice. He knew that arguments and anger would not help. Only calm reasoning could keep the situation under control. The visitors became increasingly uncomfortable. They had seen how Rizwan remained firm without aggression, and they realized that remaining on the property was not right. A young woman stepped forward hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am. I think we should leave. We are trespassing." Karen tried to protest, but Rizwan spoke to the woman gently. "You are correct. Leaving is the wise choice. I appreciate your understanding." Slowly, several visitors returned to their vehicles. Karen's group shrank further, leaving only her and a few loyal assistants. Rizwan remained at the gate, calm and steady. The tension had shifted. Now Karen was the one trying to convince others, while Rizwan simply maintained his boundaries. By noon, the yard was mostly empty. Rizwan walked around, checking the lock and making sure everything was secure. He thought carefully about what might come next. Karen was likely planning another attempt, perhaps with legal papers or more people. He had to be ready for anything. In the afternoon, Karen returned with new materials. She carried folders filled with documents, maps, and printed rules. "Rizwan," she said firmly, "we have prepared official papers showing that your property must adhere to neighborhood guidelines." "This is your final warning," Rizwan nodded. "I understand your papers, Karen. I respect documentation. But documents do not allow entry. You may present them outside the gate and I will review them. That is fair and respectful." Karen's assistants looked nervous. They had expected Rizwan to argue or panic. Instead, he remained calm, polite, and confident. Rizwan's patience was wearing down Karen's authority in front of her own team. One of the assistants whispered, "Maybe we should let this go. He is firm and it seems pointless to argue." Karen glared at him. "Do not question me in front of him. Follow instructions." Rizwan watched silently, sensing the shift in dynamics. He realized that authority without respect was fragile. Karen's anger and insistence were only causing doubt among her own group. By late afternoon, several visitors left voluntarily. Karen was left with only her most loyal assistants, but even they appeared uncertain. Rizwan spoke calmly to the remaining few. You are free to make your own choices. Respect for boundaries is important. I appreciate those who understand this simple principle. The remaining group nodded silently, realizing that Rizwan was correct. The balance of power had shifted. Karen's pride was still strong, but her influence over others had weakened. As the sun began to lower, Rizwan walked slowly through his garden. He admired the flowers and fruit trees, enjoying the quiet beauty of his property. The garden was safe, the fence was secure, and his home remained undisturbed. Karen finally realized that her day had been a failure. Rizwan's calm intelligence had overcome her attempts at intimidation. She muttered under her breath, "This is not over. I will find another way." Rizwan watched her leave in her SUV, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. His home had been protected, his boundaries respected, and he had maintained his dignity. The day had tested patience, calmness, and intelligence, and he had succeeded without conflict. Neighbors peeked from their windows and driveways, whispering about the events of the day. The story of the non-HOA property that had resisted Karen's attempts spread quickly. People admired Rizwan's approach and began to understand the power of calm determination. As evening approached, Rizwan sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with warm colors and the air was calm. His garden smelled sweet, and the distant sounds of Maplewood were peaceful. Rizwan reflected on the lessons of the day. Authority without respect was ineffective. Force without reason was fragile. Patience, intelligence, and calmness could overcome even the most determined opposition. He knew that Karen might return with new strategies, but he felt ready. He had learned how to handle aggression without anger, how to protect his property without confrontation, and how to stand firm without conflict. That night, as Rizwan prepared for bed, he felt a deep sense of peace. His home was safe, his garden secure, and his boundaries respected. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready to face them with patience, intelligence, and calm strength, and so Rizwan rested, knowing that the fight for respect and peace was ongoing, but confident in his ability to maintain both. His home was his sanctuary, and he would continue to protect it, no matter the challenges ahead. The next morning, Rizwan woke to a quiet golden sunrise. His garden was peaceful, the fruit trees swaying gently in the wind and birds chirped happily among the branches. For a moment, he allowed himself to enjoy the calm. The past days had been full of tension, but today felt different. He knew, however, that Karen Whitaker would not give up easily. Her pride had been bruised, and she was not the type to accept defeat quietly. By late morning, Rizwan's suspicions were confirmed. From a distance, he noticed the familiar hum of vehicles approaching. This time, it was not just SUVs or small groups. A single larger vehicle led a small convoy. Karen sat at the wheel, her expression sharp and determined. Behind her, several people carried cameras, measuring equipment, and folders filled with papers. Rizwan observed carefully from his porch, noticing the calculated seriousness in her actions. Karen stepped out first, straightening her blazer and taking a deep breath. "Rizwan," she said, her tone colder than before, "I am here with final authority. You must comply today, or I will escalate this matter further." Rizwan walked slowly to the gate, keeping a calm expression. "Good morning, Karen. I see that you are serious. That is understandable. But my property remains private. Anyone who enters without permission is trespassing." Karen's lips tightened, but she did not argue immediately. Instead, she motioned to her group. "Observe carefully, everyone. This is a lesson in defiance." Rizwan smiled faintly but did not respond. He understood that Karen hoped to intimidate him with presence and numbers. Patience and clarity, however, had proven more powerful than intimidation before. A man carrying a clipboard hesitated, looking uncertain. Rizwan addressed him gently. "You do not need to follow instructions blindly. You may choose to respect boundaries and leave. That is the right choice." The man nodded subtly, clearly relieved. Karen noticed and frowned. Her plan was showing cracks already. Rizwan knew that confidence and calmness were as strong as any argument. Karen, realizing her initial intimidation was not working, decided to change tactics. She pulled out a set of official-looking documents. "Rizwan, these papers show that your property must adhere to community guidelines. You cannot ignore this. Compliance is mandatory." Rizwan took a deep breath and looked at the documents carefully from the gate. "I respect documentation. I respect rules. But rules do not grant permission to enter private property. You may present these papers here at the gate and I will review them. That is fair and reasonable. Karen's assistants exchanged uneasy glances. Many had expected Rizwan to argue or panic. Instead, he remained calm and confident, his presence commanding respect. Hours passed. Karen tried different strategies: persuasion, intimidation, explanations of rules, and even subtle threats. Each time, Rizwan responded politely but firmly. He repeated that private property must be respected, and he allowed no exceptions. The remaining visitors began to question Karen's authority. A few whispered among themselves. Some looked for excuses to leave. Rizwan noticed that the tension was shifting. Karen was losing control again. By mid-afternoon, only Karen and two of her most loyal assistants remained. Rizwan walked slowly to the porch holding a cup of tea. "Karen," he said gently, "I understand that you wish to enforce rules. But authority without respect does not work here. You are welcome to speak from outside the gate, and I will listen. That is the only way forward peacefully." Karen's face reddened. Her pride demanded compliance, but her audience was shrinking. Even her assistants were hesitant, realizing that remaining on the property without permission was wrong. One of the assistants spoke quietly. "Maybe we should just leave." "He is calm, firm, and clearly in control," Karen snapped at him. "Do not speak without instructions." But the damage was done. The assistant's words reflected a truth she could not ignore. Rizwan's patience and intelligence had created doubt, even among her own loyal supporters. Rizwan decided it was time to secure a final, peaceful resolution. He walked closer to the gate, speaking directly to Karen and her remaining assistants. "You may leave now without conflict. You do not need to escalate. Respect for boundaries is important. Everyone here has seen that calm and understanding work better than force." Karen clenched her fists, realizing that her attempts had failed. Rizwan's calm and reason had not only protected his property, but had also influenced her assistants to question unnecessary confrontation. The last visitors slowly walked back to their vehicles. Rizwan observed silently, noting how every step had reinforced the lesson. Calmness and patience were stronger than aggression. Karen watched silently as the vehicles drove away, leaving her alone on Rizwan's property. For a moment she stared at him, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. Rizwan remained calm, his hands resting lightly on the gate. "Karen," he said gently, "I respect rules. I respect fairness. But my home is private. That is non-negotiable." Karen turned sharply and walked back to her SUV, muttering under her breath about reports, fines, and possible legal action. Rizwan watched her leave, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. His home had remained untouched. His boundaries had been respected, and he had maintained peace throughout the ordeal. By late evening, the neighborhood had become aware of the day's events. Neighbors peeked from windows and driveways, whispering about what had occurred. The story of the non-HOA property standing firm against Karen's attempts spread quickly. People admired Rizwan's approach and began to see the power of patience, intelligence, and calm determination. Rizwan walked slowly through his garden, enjoying the gentle evening breeze. The flowers glowed softly in the fading sunlight, and the fruit trees swayed gently. He smiled quietly, appreciating the peace of his home. He reflected on the lessons of the past days. Authority without respect is fragile. Force without reason is ineffective. Patience, clarity, and intelligence can overcome even the most determined opposition. By standing firm with calmness and respect, he had protected his home and shown others the importance of boundaries. That night, Rizwan sat on his porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. The garden smelled sweet, and the cool air carried a sense of serenity. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel complete peace. Karen's attempts had failed. The visitors had left, convinced of the importance of respecting boundaries. Rizwan had not needed anger or confrontation. His calm, polite, and firm approach had accomplished what force could not. As he prepared for bed, Rizwan knew that challenges might return. Karen's pride and determination were not easily overcome. But he also knew that he was prepared. His patience, intelligence, and respect for what was right were his strongest allies, and so Rizwan rested. His home remained his sanctuary, his garden secure, and his property respected. The battle had been won not through aggression, but through calm strength, clear boundaries, and unwavering determination. Maplewood would remember this story for a long time. The non-HOA property that had resisted 10 buses of strangers, the owner who had locked the gate behind them, and the calm intelligence that had turned chaos into peace. Rizwan's courage and wisdom had created a lasting lesson. Respect, patience, and clarity are stronger than force or authority without understanding. The night passed quietly. Rizwan's home remained secure, the garden untouched and the air calm. Tomorrow might bring new challenges, but Rizwan was ready. He had faced adversity with patience and had emerged victorious without conflict. His home, his sanctuary, his rules, all had been protected. And as he closed his eyes that night, he felt confident that whatever came next, he would face it with the same calm, intelligent, and unwavering approach that had carried him through the trials of the past week.